I promise the whole movie isn't that heavy. Like, I think, I don't know. Okay. I am not a morning person, so if this was like creative evenings from like 10 to 2 in the morning, I would be on and everything would be great. But other than that, I have a cheat sheet just in case. And so I wanted to say thank you to the music hall, to the loft, to the Creative Mornings crew, and to you guys for getting here, hopefully with coffee and waking up. So I figured one of the best ways for me to talk about this, and heroin is pretty taboo. I think that, you know, that kind of falls pretty much in line with like, hey, this is a taboo subject. What, heroin? I live here in town. I have a 12-year-old son. In December of 2014, I was, you know, it was a nice day. It was one of those like warm Decembers. And so my son and I and my dog walked downtown. I grabbed a cup of coffee, and I was sitting at the coffee shop for a second and noticed that every headline of every newspaper there was about heroin. So if it was the Portsmouth Herald, it was, you know, another heroin overdose. It was, you know, the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, you know, it was all heroin, the heroin epidemic. And I sat there going, I grew up in Miami, Florida, and I expect that kind of headline there. I didn't expect to see that here and like the grandiosity of the whole thing nationwide. And so I finished my coffee, you know, walked back home, and which is literally 0.2 miles from where we are right now. And I ran into a friend of mine's younger brother who I hadn't seen him in a long time. And I was like, hey, it's great to see you. How have you been? I heard you were in a car accident. You know, you look like you're doing good. Is everything okay? And he goes, yeah, I'm doing well. He's like, do you know the full story? And I was like, no, I just heard you were in a car accident. He goes, yeah, I'm a heroin addict. I shot up on 101, nodded out, totaled my truck. Lucky to be alive. I've been living at a sober living place. I'm 9 months clean. And I just sat there like my jaw hit the floor, because if you looked at this kid and you knew this kid and I knew him, you know, he'd play catch with my son. And he, you know, grew up in a good home, good looking kid, smart, well educated. He was in his master's program in college. You know, he looked like he stepped off the cover of GQ magazine. He was like, he was the kid that you wanted your son to grow up to be like, or your daughter to date. And so it was one of those things where it hit me pretty quickly. I was like, you're not a heroin addict. Like, just everything went wrong in my head. You know, that story of what is heroin addiction and everything that I think we all think of, it's not real. You know, the real story is it's this kid. It's, you know, sons, daughters, friends, neighbors, people that you know, people that you don't expect. And so just in that, you know, 15-minute interaction of grabbing a coffee, seeing the headlines, walking home and running into this kid, I finished my walk home, and I literally pulled out a pen and paper and started an outline and wrote the outline to what is now this film. And the first thing that I wrote, and I was really specific about it, in that I was like, I wanted to do a film on heroin, and I was like, the first note was no spoons, no needles, no, you know, following the junkie, you know, and seeing what happens and watching him score dope on a street corner. And, you know, like, that story's been told so many times. And it's not, I think it sets up everybody to fail. You know, it's a story that we, you know, it's almost like glorifying that addiction and that problem. And the reality is, you know, the guy that you just saw, you know, Eric Spofford, he's amazing. Like, that guy is amazing. During the course of filming, he runs 2 treatment centers in the state. At the time when I met him and we first started talking, and he opened up 4 other ones. You know, he's now basically responsible for 160 treatment beds in the state of New Hampshire. You know, more treatment beds than the state of New Hampshire is. And he's expanding, and he's, you know, just, the guy is amazing. I consider him, you know, a role model, a hero. But if you see his story and you're somebody who's struggling with addiction of any sort, or, you know, with heroin and stuff like that, you can probably see that there's a way out, that there's some kind of light at the end of the tunnel. And I think that showing that hopeful side of everything, I think that story never gets told. Like, it hasn't been told before. And so then as a filmmaker, I was like, all right, this has, you know, something, I really want to pursue it. And I made the mistake of telling somebody, which the filmmakers in the audience know. If you tell somebody, oh, I have a great idea for a film, or I wrote this script, you want to read it? And you show it and you make it real, then you go like, oh crap, I really have to do this now. So I told somebody, and they were like, that's a good idea, you should do that. And I was like, all right, great, now I have to go do this. And I wasn't quite sure, and it was Christmas time, and so this is where everything gets really kind of weird for me, is so, you know, 2 weeks later, I'm on a boat in the Caribbean with my son and my mom and dad, middle of nowhere, and this guy walks up to me day 2 of the cruise, and he goes, "Hey, you look really familiar. Are you from Portsmouth, New Hampshire?" I was like, "What the?" Like, this doesn't make any sense to me. And I looked at him, I was like, "Yeah, are you?" And he goes, "Yeah, no." He's like, and we started talking, and he asked me what I did, and I said, "Oh, I'm a filmmaker." And he's like, "Oh, what are you working on?" I said, "Oh, you know, here's," and I kind of told him, and he goes, "Wow." He goes, "I think you should do that. That's a great idea." And I said, "Thank you." And he goes, "You know, just so you know," he's like, "I'm 25 years clean." And I was like, "What?" You know, like my world is kind of just, you know, kind of collapsing in this moment, going, "Are you kidding me?" And then to get even weirder, and by the way, you know, this guy is, at the time, he was probably, I don't know, mid-50s. It didn't fit the stereotype of what you looked at, you know, what you think of. And my mom actually became friends with him on the cruise, and my dad. And it was really funny because he tells me the story about how he got clean, and it was in Miami during the time that I lived in Miami. So I just remember being like, okay, so everything that I thought, you know, I knew, I didn't know. So that really started this journey for me, and then it became, you know, meeting the right people and talking to the right people, and I think kind of how I wanted to tell the story. And so one of the big things, and you might have noticed it in that clip, and there'll be another one in a couple minutes, but I wanted to do it very differently. I didn't want to do what I'd said before, the needle porn version of, you know, oh, and the shock and awe, and, you know, the 2020 kind of version of it. But I wanted to tell real people's real stories, and a lot of them are recovery, some of them are not. But I wanted it to have that really personal feeling to it, and I wanted to do something that I wanted to make the audience really like and get to know these people and their stories and know them as people, because I think that that's kind of that first way of breaking that stigma and the stereotype and getting that and kind of talking about it. And the fact that we're actually sitting here talking about heroin is kind of an interesting thing. And so I was like, instead of, you know, when Eric is talking about, oh, you know, I was, you know, robbed a guy with a knife, and I was, you know, doing this, that, and the other thing, and I was shooting up, and I weighed 140 pounds, and you know, a lot of filmmakers would maybe go that route and say, okay, I'm going to show a dramatization of that, or I'm going to show footage of him when he was looking like that, and have that. And I'll be honest, a lot of people who struggled with heroin addiction didn't take a lot of pictures or shoot a lot of video footage of themselves at that time. I do have some, so who did, but you know, so they didn't. And I wanted to think of another way to do it that was creative and kind of help the audience identify and look at these people talking about this very intimate story of their life, and be able to identify and be like, well, I know that guy. Like, I can relate to that guy. And so when you see Eric and he's talking about these really personal moments of, you know, where things are kind of at an all-time low for him, but he's with his son, you know, and he's giving his son his kiss, and they're playing on the playground, or they're, you know, and so juxtaposing those images with that story, I think kind of helps you go, oh, wait a minute, that's not that stereotype that I have in my head as to what does this individual look like. So that was very, very much like a choice. And part of that choice was because I didn't really have this footage available to me of like, oh, you know, Eric was like, I have 2 pictures of me then. And you know, and you look at them and you're like, wow, man, that's, you know, but I can't. I really wanted to make the choice of going outside that box and showing people, you know, as they are today, telling these stories, but you're getting this juxtaposition, and you're kind of being forced to look at them as a human being in a real story, as opposed to like, oh, that's that story of that tale of, you know, alleyways and needles, and, you know, people that are really at a low point in their life and they're struggling with their addiction. So I'm going to refer to my cheat sheet now. Hold on. Told you I'm not awake yet. Oh, one of the other things that I did, and it's a style of filmmaking, I guess. I didn't go to film school, but I really wanted to have the people in the film and these characters and these people tell their own stories in their own words. So it's a documentary without, you know, there's no narration. There isn't, you know, I'd love to be like, oh, I could get a great famous narrator and do that, but I think it takes the story out, and you're being told as an audience like what you're supposed to think, as opposed to hearing people's own stories in their own words, which makes editing really tricky. Mm-hmm. And there's no text on screen. There's no statistics. It's not, you know, there might be one at the very, very, very end of the film. But it was a way to really humanize people. It helped destigmatize this issue and kind of put it into a light that I hadn't seen before for this. So that was pretty much the impetus and the inspiration for the film. And I think I've gone through everything that I wanted to talk to you. And yeah, so if we could put those next two little clips on, I'm gonna get out of the way. Boy, so I don't know if that illustrated what I was trying to say as far as like, and I heard laughter with, Dean and his daughter, which is, there's actually one of my favorite shots in the whole film, like when she looks up out, sitting on her dad's back, and she's like, just, there's a couple of great things. And there's definitely moments in this film where you will laugh. So that being said, I think the other thing I wanted to talk about too is as a documentary filmmaker, especially when you're doing something with a topic like this, I think I filmed for like 2 years and somewhere around 50 to 70 different people and rallies, like different gatherings, types of things and stuff like that. And so when you do that, I always like to use this analogy of okay, even though I filmed all these great people and not everybody's in the film, it's like you take 50 of your favorite jigsaw puzzles and you're like, oh, these are great, and you're like, I'm gonna pick 12 of them. And then from those 12, I'm going to take, my favorite pieces from them. I'm going to make like my favorite jigsaw puzzle. Like this is going to be, my own unique one. So it's definitely an exercise in finding the right people and the right stories and everything like that. And I think everybody that's in the film is really identifiable to everybody, but even like different segments of the population. So like when you look at somebody like Dean, I mean, he's a great guy, and I love the fact that these people are all like friends of mine now. But Dean, he kind of looks like your everyday kid. He's kind of a nerd. He used to always wear a pocket protector with a pen. If anybody knows, lav mic, sorry. If anybody knows Dean, he probably always has a pen on him. If he doesn't, it's kind of funny. Like he always does. But he doesn't fit your idea. And so when you see him telling that story about, shooting up in my car, blood streaming down my arm, he's playing with his daughter, it really humanizes him versus seeing that graphic, visual that you kind of get in your head anyway. So that was really a lot of my goal with this, was like, if we're ever gonna, and Eric talks about it, if we're ever gonna beat this disease and really challenge it and really look at this, I think that destigmatizing it and like having open discussions and being able to have people who are in recovery say, yeah, it's a time in my life and it was really difficult, but I was able to get through. And I think when you have people that have made it through as inspiration, you can look at it and go, okay, if they can do it. And I think Eric has one of my favorite lines in the film. He said, you can find a drug addict as bad as me, you won't find anybody as worse. And what he has accomplished with his life, I mean, I'll say this, if he was here right now, he'd probably look at me kind of funny, but he owns a bunch of treatment facilities and he takes a helicopter to work. So from a guy who was a homeless street addict, who was facing jail and never thought he was gonna live past the age of 21, he's done really well for himself and he's helped countless people, and so he is an inspiration, I think, for anybody. And but it's funny, he takes his helicopter up, and his excuse was, he's like, I get more done. He's like, I don't have to drive, somebody flies me. We fly low enough that I still have Wi-Fi and I can like do all my emails and respond to all my, and I'm laughing, I'm like, you are super committed. But the guy, he's a force to be reckoned with. So yeah, I don't know. I think that was all I really wanted to say and show some footage. But I thought the more important thing, especially with me just sitting here and not standing and pacing back and forth, which is totally what I would do, was just to open it up for Q&A and conversation. And I don't know. This is really awkward, by the way. I'm used to being on the other side of the camera and having people. Oh, and that was one other thing that I just thought of when doing this, because somebody asked me, they're like, oh, did you have a crew with you and all that stuff? And I had this visual for me personally, was that, when you're filming people and they're talking to you about some really intimate details in their lives and some things that are very taboo to talk about, having a guy with a boom mic, and lighting and camera set up in a 2-camera shot or something like that, it really, really, people sit there and they're like, oh, like there's a camera right there, and it's uncomfortable. But I think it really takes people out of their ability to, really convey like their true stories. And the great thing about that, so I really learned to, do a lot of camera work. So I apologize if it's not all great, but it was really more for me to get their stories as true to that. And the greatest thing was a lot of people at the end of it, they were like, oh my God, I forgot the camera was there. And I'm like, that's perfect. But they weren't wearing a lav mic and there wasn't a guy with a mic there. And every once in a while I'd bring somebody else running camera, and which was great. It kind of freed me up a little bit. But I think that making everybody as comfortable as they possibly could be in their own, it wasn't like me asking them to show up somewhere to film them. It was like, hey, yeah, I'll come by. And they'd answer the door and be like, well, where's your crew? And I'm like, it's just me in a camera bag, or just me and one other friend of mine who's and so I was fortunate to work with a couple of really good, friends that are great camera operators and TPs and stuff like that. So with that being said, I've probably eaten up a ton of time, and let's do Q&A because that's more fun. Wow, okay, hold on a second. You were first.
So with all of the unique stories that everybody shared with you, could you identify a golden thread?
Nope. No. I think everybody's story, there was a lot of stories that were unexpected. I think that there's, the stories that you expect. I mean, there's the stories that you've seen. A lot of people, prescription pills, it was just kind of that road. I talked to one guy and he was like, yeah, I was 14 years old. I twisted my knee on a trampoline. I got, OxyContin, and it was, he was definitely overprescribed. And he goes, by the end of that, I was addicted, and I went from paying a $4 copay and everything was fine to I'm now spending, $80 and trying to buy it, from a drug dealer, and so, and it was one of those things. He's like, at the age of, I think, 15 or 14 when all this stuff was going on, he's like, I didn't understand that what I was doing was this illegal narcotic. It was a pill that I got from my doctor. Then when I couldn't afford it, and the exact same thing, was I got the same feeling from heroin versus this pill, and I mean, you hear the stories of people crushing it, snorting it, and then moving on. But yeah, I don't think there was any real common thread. Wait.
Yeah, that was actually my question about the connection between prescription drugs and heroin addiction. But to jump to another topic on the criminal justice system, some of the individuals that you spoke to, were any of them incarcerated, and how did they view how we deal with people who are addicted?
Yeah, I mean, I talked to people on both sides. So I talked to politicians, I talked to police officers, people who had been to jail, people that just got out of jail. Yeah, and I think the one thing, and it's great too when you have police officers and they all say the exact same thing. They're like, we cannot arrest our way out of this. Arresting somebody does not help a problem. This is not a legal issue. It sometimes is when people are committing crimes to support their habit, but arresting them and putting them into jail isn't going to help them with their addiction, with their disease. You have to realize that, okay, this is a disease, it is an addiction, we need to do the right thing in these situations, and not, it's like, hey, you're diabetic, let's throw you in jail and not give you insulin. You know what I mean? It's
trying to follow up on that, the individual who runs all of the treatment centers, has he ever accepted someone who would have gone to jail and they've gone into his treatment center instead?
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, I don't know, definitely, but and one of the things that I can totally there's a great book, and I interviewed him. He's in the film. He's an awesome guy. His name's Johan Hari. He wrote a book called Chasing the Scream. He's a London author, New York Times bestseller. It's an amazing book, and it really will change your perception on, what is addiction, what is the last 100 years of the drug war in this country, and how can we look at other countries and what they've done and really help destigmatize, change this, and address this issue and do it probably the right way. Because right now, you do the same thing for 100 years and it's not working. Why do we keep doing the same thing, thinking it's gonna, work? So, yes.
It's my wife, so I better defer to
Oh,
her.
yeah, no, I'm sorry.
Michael, thank you for your story. It's obvious that you're on purpose, and that the creative process that you went through during those 2 years has, shaped you in some way. It's such a great feeling of accomplishment to finish something. I wonder, what has it inspired in you for a next step?
To do the follow-up to this film, there's been talk of it, and if I can get it fully funded, I'll definitely do it. But to do the recovery effect, and a lot of that has been inspired by the people in here, a few other stories, what's gone on in other countries, like I mentioned, talking with Johan in his book, and what he did is he traveled 30,000 miles and went to 6-7 different countries and really experienced a lot of different things, and you know, in countries and how they're dealing with, you know, prevention and recovery and treatment, and really tackling those issues where, you know, I think in Portugal, you know, there was a time when like a full 1% of the population were IV drug users, and now that's drastically reduced. You know, they legalized heroin, I believe. I might be getting some of the ones confused how they did it, but you know, they did that so that people, you know, right now the biggest thing with fentanyl is with heroin is that, you know, you're seeing all the overdose and the deaths, and that's making news because of fentanyl that they're mixing it with. So, you know, if you think about it, to put it into perspective, you know, heroin's 80 times stronger than, or I'm sorry, fentanyl's 80 times stronger than heroin. So imagine going to a bar and being like, oh, hey, it's St. Patrick's Day, I'm going to have a Guinness. And you get your pint of Guinness, but you're drinking one Guinness, what you think is one Guinness, but it's 50 or 80 Guinnesses, and you're going to have alcohol poisoning and die. You know, so if you're somebody who's just struggling with their addiction to heroin, and you know, that's what we're witnessing right now, and that's why it's making headlines and the attention. So, you know, if anything good comes out of that, hopefully it's the awareness, and we can change that. So, all right, did you?
Yeah, just got a quick, so it is taboo, so
Yeah.
I'm just curious, the folks that are talking, or that you targeted to talk to,
Mm-hmm.
I was just curious how you selected those, because I'm sure there's a number of different people.
Oh, yeah.
And then once you target a person, you know, you want to speak with them and have them join in, you know, to have them talk so openly about it, how did you work through that?
You know, I think I got lucky. Like I always joke, like I didn't go to film school. So I didn't know what it is that I'm not supposed to do or what I'm supposed to do, which I think is, you know, I think Quentin Tarantino has a great quote where he's like, you know, I didn't go to film school, I went to film. So, you know, growing up, I watched a lot of films and still try to and love film and music. And, you know, I think when I went to college, you know, I got degrees in psychology and communications, and I was getting my master's in counseling. So I really think a lot of it was just like relating to people and putting them in a situation that was really comfortable. You know, like I said, when you don't put a mic on somebody and you're just hanging out talking, after a while, you know, I mean, this is a lot of people, and it's sort of nerve-wracking, but I'm pretty comfortable now. But, you know, you put somebody in a situation when you're just hanging out and you're talking, and you get a lot of, you know, I had a lot of people, you know, at the end of one of the very first day of interviews, you know, one of the girls that I filmed, Sandy Coyle, who some of you guys might know, she comes up, you know, we turn off the camera, she's like, I literally told you a story I haven't talked about in 10 years, and there's less than 5 people that know that story. And I was like, wow, thank you. You know, and this is the first day of filming, and I'm glad, like, you know, and it's one of those things, you kind of like let the camera roll, and you're like, all right, let's just talk and just get along and hang out. And you know, to kind of embrace her story, you know, to have gone from that moment with her and then see her now on her career path, and she opened up Safe Harbor Recovery Center, and then they just opened up another Safe Harbor, and she's been to the White House to talk to the president about the opioid epidemic, and to see through that process is just, you know, it's phenomenal. It's an awesome thing to see, and you know, and it's, you know, those are the stories that I think, in order to get over everything, need to be told in order to really address the issue. Because if you keep doing the, you know, 2020 documentary of the guy, and at the end the guy dies, you know, then it's not helping, in my opinion.
So I have a question. So certain topics are obviously taboo, and for a reason, because people don't like talking about them. I find that it's not that they're not interesting, it's that certain people don't like bringing them up, like to sweep it under the rug. When you're in your early stages and you're getting fundraising and you're trying to gather a crew and you're just talking to people about the process, how do you get people on board with these topics? How do you overcome your own personal fear of ridicule from choosing a taboo topic and get them on your side?
That is, man, I didn't prepare for that question. That's serious. That's a great question. I don't know. I guess I think that just because of, I don't know, it was an interesting topic to me. It was something that I was like, man, the last documentary I did, it's really funny. Like, that was a music doc, and it was, you know, it was dedicated. You know, there were a couple of people that the film was dedicated to, but one of them was a friend of everybody that, you know, was involved in that film, who 7 years ago overdosed and died. You know, and so at that point, when we did that film and dedicated it to Jeff, like, I didn't think that I was going to be doing this film now. You know, it was that 1 15-minute walk from getting a cup of coffee, you know, and reading headlines in a newspaper, running into somebody who's, you know, a friend of mine, and then hearing that story and being like compelled to, like, okay, I'm going to do this. And then it was kind of like, well, I'm just going to do it. I said I was going to do it. I should just do it. And it seems like it was timely. I think it was important I feel like it was an important film to do and do in a different way. So I mean, people could have ridiculed me and been like, oh, it's a waste. And I'm like, well, yeah, but I feel like it's you know, and I can honestly say I stuck pretty much to that outline that I wrote, and I think I'm really proud of the film I made. So, and I think it came out better than I thought it was going to, hopefully. Hopefully, like the music hall, that'll go really well, and I won't be like, oh, that was missing. So I'm going to answer your question again in like a couple weeks.
Can I ask for one little part to that? It won't be as intense, I promise.
Okay, good.
Do you think that after going through this process, do you think that there's any rules that you can't do or you shouldn't do taboo topics that are personal relative to your, like, you?
No, I totally think I mean, I think if you're going to do a film, and actually, you know, documentary filmmaking is funny because I swore after the first one, like, I'm never doing another one. And then now I'm already thinking about doing another one. I was like, oh, man. So it's kind of funny. Like, I like doing music videos. Those are always great. But, so, yeah, no, I think if you've got an idea for a film and it compels you, like, do it. Because there's an audience for it. You know, I think that's, like, the greatest thing in the world. Like, if there's always going to be an audience for whatever it is. And if you're interested in it, chances are there's going to be a lot of other people. So, all right.
I'm sorry.
Oh.
You're doing a great job in front, by the way.
Oh.
So 2 thumbs up. So this is the end of your journey with this film. You're coming to an end, but for audiences, it's just the beginning, and now you've got a whole new kind of life with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about what your plans are for this film? Who's going to see it? Is it going to be in front of the legislature? Is it going to be in front of schools? Like, where can you take this film to make a broader impact?
Yeah, I mean, so back in that early, like I said, that was one of those great, you know, that was a very creative morning, by the way. Like, I literally wrote down, I think, 3 pages in a notebook, and one of the things I wrote was, you know, it was politicians, it was, you know, all these things involved. Because at the time, you know, it was, you know, a political thing, and with the presidential election going on, and so I filmed a lot in Concord at the State House, and I filmed, you know, the former governor, now senator, and a few other senators and a couple other, you know, people. So it's definitely, I think, and there's a whole plan in place to get a lot of people from Concord and the State House and other places to attend the screening. And then there's also, early on, there was this idea to do an educational component of the film. So depending on what came out of that film is to kind of narrow it down and make a 15-minute piece for like schools or classrooms and stuff like that, and to kind of do that. But the big thing, I think, for me is to get it distributed. So at one point I was like, oh, we got to submit to film festivals and do that. But you submit to a film festival and then you wait to hear if you got in, and then you have to wait until they screen it, which is, you know, so I could submit today and it's not until, you know, July or August of the festival, you know, and so that's, you know, 6 months that nobody's seeing this film. So I would much rather sell it, have it get out to distribution, put it in a couple of festivals, hopefully through a distributor, and get eyes on it, you know, get people to see it. And so, you know, that's kind of, so if anybody has any friends in distribution, let me know. We can talk. But yeah, no, so there is the educational component. And then also, you know, there's been talk of doing the kind of the sequel follow-up film and doing the recovery effect. So did I answer your question? Oh, hey.
I'm very interested in the whole area of storytelling, and you're talking about making your ideal jigsaw puzzle. So can you talk a little bit about the way you went about making decisions about the arc of the story, what to include and what not?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was, you know, what captivated me, what stories captivated me that would tell this overall story the best. And the sad thing is I could probably make 2 or 3 other films out of the footage I have. Right. And there are people in this film that are not in this film, I should say, who have amazing stories that I loved, and I just couldn't find a place to fit them in. And one of the things is, you know, you don't want to have too many characters in a film, because then as an audience, you're kind of like, well, wait, who is that? Who is that? Like, what was that person's story? So, you know, the amount of people in it is enough so that you really feel like you get to know all of these main characters in this film. And, you know, so that was a very conscious thing. And it's just, you know, whose stories fit and woven the best and told the best. And like I said, I think it becomes harder too when you're saying, hey, I'm going to do this and I'm not going to have anybody narrating it. And so you kind of have to just pick and choose and which stories were the ones that fell into place the right way. And editing I was never an editor before this, and
You didn't go to editing school?
No, no, I didn't even. I just played drums a lot when I was a kid, and then I stopped playing drums in bands and started playing guitar on my couch. So.
So as a follow-up, in a way, the characters carry the narration. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's all their own stories and their words. You know, there's nobody else narrating it and telling their stories but them. And I think that's, you know, you're true to those people and what they're saying. I mean, you know, far be it for me to like put my voice on there and be like, well, what Eric was trying to say was, you know, I think that takes you as an audience out of it. It pulls you out of that story, and you don't feel like, you know, and I shot handheld a lot of times, and sometimes I was like, oh crap, I didn't pull focus enough, and I was like, you know, doing that and getting enough. But it's really just to make you feel like you're sitting there having that discussion and talking and feeling part of it, you know, and being able to relate to them as, you know, as people.
Somewhere in the clips there, I heard Eric speak to knowing how to help people, but not having a clue how to stop it. With all of the interviews you took, did anybody have a suggestion what they think is a possible way to put an end to this?
I mean, I think a lot of people, you know, I think we're already at this point where, because we're talking about it, that's a step in the right direction. You know, the fact, you know, this is something, I mean, I always laugh, like I grew up listening to punk rock and jazz. You know, those are my two, you know, things that really moved me, and talk about two communities of people that were really affected by heroin. You know, I mean, Miles Davis and, you know, John Coltrane, and then you've got, you know, the Ramones and, you know, that whole thing. So, you know, I think just the fact that it's not, we're talking about it in a way where it's not stigmatizing people. You see people like Eric, and you're like, yeah, man, right on. You know, you're proud of him, and you're proud, and you love hearing his journey and his story, and Dean and Sandy and everybody else. Whereas, you know, 5 years ago, people were like, oh yeah, so I'm a heroin addict, I'm recovering, I'm opening up a recovery center, and people would be like, oh, okay. And then they'll, you know, they're like, okay, that's great, yeah, nice to know. And so I think now, I think it's just education. I think when you get to that point, so I think we're moving in that direction. You know, and hopefully we can follow other countries' leads or do something that really addresses it.
Have you run across any examples where instead of educating, it's sensationalized?
I haven't. You know, thankfully, I guess. I mean, I suppose, you know, with any kind of, you know, I don't feel like, and this is my own personal opinion, but I don't feel like, you know, I don't think that music or film or anything like that is going to influence somebody to do something that they weren't going to probably do regardless anyways. So just because you know about it doesn't mean you're going to, you know. I knew growing up in Miami, I knew what drugs were. You know, I lived there during the Miami Vice phase. They used to film outside our, you know, down the street, you know, and I knew what drugs were and the headlines of the drugs and the Colombian drug cartel. And I always joke, I was like, I think I was 10 and I knew what a Colombian necktie was. Like, I didn't want my son to know what a Colombian necktie was when I was 10, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to go out and use cocaine and, you know, sell drugs and stuff like that. So, I mean, that's just you know, just because you're aware of it doesn't mean you're going to use.
Mike, I think we have time for one more.
Ooh.
Peter's our last question.
Hi.
Hey.
You were saying you had a son.
Yep.
And I was wondering how, you know, in the course of making this film and discovering these people's backstories about how they, you know, what led into their addiction at the age they began, how has that impacted your, you know, your path to being a parent and raising your son, and how does that affect your, you know, the development of your relationship with him? Because it seems like they started at such a young age.
Yeah, I mean, and yeah, when somebody says I was an IV drug user at 15, you're like, holy crap, when I was 15, I was still afraid of girls. And, you know, like, oh, I want to ask her out, but I don't know. No, I think for me, I think there's a very selfish reason too why I did this film. As I look at it, you know, where I grew up and, you know, the things I saw when I was a kid, and it's not like I lived in a bad era. Miami's still a great place, but I think, you know, it was very selfish in the sense that I was like, I want to address this because I don't want my son to have to see these things all the time and have an understanding of it and an awareness of it. And, you know, and I joke about the fact I was like, hey, are you going to come to the screening? And he was like, Dad, I've seen the film like, like tons. He's like, how many times have you watched it, or I've heard you and you've edited that? He's like, I can probably, you know, he could probably quote the whole film at this point. So. But I think talking about it, you know, as you know, if you sit there and you go like, oh, my kid's, you know, 10 years old, is that old enough? Yeah, you know, I don't think it's ever too young to start talking about that and addressing it, because I think it, you know, it's helpful. So, but yeah, it was definitely a selfish thing for me to be like, I want to make sure that I'm doing this because I have a son who lives in this community, and I want him to not be blindsided by it. So
Mike,
that's a good question.
speaking of that,
Ooh,
I
yes.
think we had a young man here who had
Oh.
a question.
Right.
He's
Yeah.
a,
Hey.
he's a filmmaker too.
Oh boy.
I
He
was wondering,
already knows more
how
than me.
did you get into the documentary business?
Huh. I stumbled into it. I mean, I think and I've said this a lot, but I quote, friends, and then, the New Hampshire Film Festival. I mean, like, I started going to that and living around here, and I've always been into film and music, and just meeting a lot of filmmakers and hanging out on their sets and being asked, like, oh, hey, do you want to be an extra? Sure. Hey, do you want to do this role? Sure. I'm like, yeah, why not? I'll be a PA. I mean, I've been a cable wrangler on, stuff, and just been like, oh, I'm pulling cables. And then, I've set up, tables for, actors and crew to have lunch, and then all of a sudden the next, 2 days later, I'm like, hey, do you mind being in this scene as an extra? Do you want to? Sure. And just being on film sets and like, and then I wrote a script and I was like, showed it to somebody, like, yeah, that's great. What are you going to do? And I said, I don't know. And they were like, well, you should shoot it and you should do it. And I was like, okay. And so I think just kind of just doing it. So if you're a filmmaker and, watch films and get involved in doing it, and you have it a lot easier now. I mean, it's so much, you don't have to buy a film and have a big camera. You can, I shot some of the stuff on my iPhone, which is funny when you're like, hey, I can shoot 4K RAW on my iPhone, and I don't have to go spend $5,000 on a camera or $30,000. I rented a camera that was like $100,000 camera for my first film, and I was like, Jesus, this is crazy. So, yeah, but just do it. I think that's like the best advice. Just Nike. I'm sorry, I owe royalties now to Nike.
That's the new message.
Yeah, no, just. See, if I was awake more, that wouldn't have come out.
All right, everybody.
But yeah.
Thank you.